All right, what's happening, everybody? I thought I'd do an update here for you guys. This is the black, the first primer coat, probably the only primer coat that I'm going to be putting on top of this. I had the white primer, that's a sealer primer, and that did a pretty good job of covering all the repairs that I have along here and over in here. I had a lot. I moved these holes over. They were too far down, so the strings were coming off, you know, really close to the edge of the fretboard over here. So I moved those up, and I can still see where I re-drilled and then patched around there with epoxy resin. I want to get you guys a nice close-up on that. See it? See it right there? You can still see the edge of that one right there. You can see that one right there. And you could definitely see that one right there. Now, what that is that's a difference in the texture underneath the primer. So remember, we got wood and then we got epoxy. So the epoxy is naturally going to come up a lot smoother than the wood. So the primer is going to absorb into the wood and it's going to lay on top of the epoxy. So it's completely covered. So I'm not worried about the color coat showing that through. It will not show that through, even though I can still see it through the primer. This horn right here, this was the horn that we redid. We moved the whole thing back, and we reshaped this whole thing right here, and we moved it back. Now I still got some marks in here. See it? Right there. And then there's another one right there. I think those are probably from my chisel. And that is because when I tore the binding off of this, there was binding on there. Then I put new binding on there. Then I hated it. So instead of me tearing that binding off, I just rerouted the channel while the binding was on there and cut it all out. And that was to make room for this orange binding that I got on there, which looks great, by the way. You can see the back. It's coming along very nicely. It's got 2 gloss coats on it. That right there was a white mark on the back of the guitar. So I wet sanded that one little spot to make sure that white mark was in the clear, not in the paint, in case I had to reshoot it. So I kept wiping it with my thumb, and it wasn't coming off. So I couldn't tell if it was under the clear in the paint or if it was just in the clear. So I wet sanded it real quick. It came out real easy. But I will wet sand the whole back of this guitar after we're done the front of this guitar. We'll wet sand the whole thing together. We'll give this a couple of clear coats. Then we'll wet sand the whole thing. Then we'll clear coat the entire guitar. Now, the way that I got this binding to look the way that it looks, I used just masking tape along the edge here. Let's see. You'll get the idea. I just ran a tape line back here for the primer, and I sanded it. Then I ran it to here for the first color coat. Then I ran it to where it is for the second color coat. So I just inched my way towards the front of the guitar so that I don't have a hard paint edge right here where I would have to build the clear up way too much to make this a smooth transition right here. So right now it feels really smooth. I can still see a tape line right there, but I haven't sanded this clear back yet, and I'm pretty sure that's just going to go away when I sand. And don't forget, it's going to get, you know, maybe 3 more coats of clear on top of this. So that'll go away. This one will not go away. I'm going to have to put a little bit of filler in there. Now, the way that I get my binding exposed on the front, I'm going to show you guys how I did it. So on the headstock, this has not been sanded yet. I put some tape around the perimeter of the guitar. I leave it sticking up maybe 1/4 of an inch. And then I take a knife and I cut that tape off. And the way I cut that tape off is by pushing in towards the guitar. Never cut when you're pulling out, because you'll pull the tape and then you'll get spray paint down on your binding in there, which, you know, it's not a terrible, you know, end of the world scenario, but you don't want to be scraping on that binding if you don't have to be. So if you just cut in, and I got just a real slight angle. Like, I don't want to cut like on a sharp angle, just real slight angle like that. And I push it in towards the guitar like that. And that gives me enough that I can go ahead and spray paint that. After I do that, this is what I get right here. So the edge of the binding is spray painted, which is okay. You can do that, you know, like some people will hold the blade where they got just a tip of the blade sticking out, and they'll go around and they'll make that line, you know, the same thickness all the way down like that. That's one way to do it. Because this is only primer, what I don't want to do is keep building up the paint with 2 color coats on top of this and then scrape it off, because what you'll see is the color coat transition to the primer, and you'll see a line between the edge of the paint and the edge of the binding of a different color in there. I don't want that. So every time I paint on top of this binding, I have to take that paint off so that I can have a gentle taper to the height of the finished top coat. I do that on the first couple of coats with a knife. I just scrape like this, very gently. Because I don't want to remove any of the binding. I just want to remove the paint from the binding. And that's what you get. I'm going to go a little bit further back because it's a little thin, right? I definitely want a little bit more of the binding to show. And the way I do that is by changing the angle of my blade so that I'm going flatter and flatter as I go. So see how it's getting wider? Okay. Much better. That's what it's going to look like when it's all done. When I do the color coats, I'll do that again very lightly, and then I will finish that with probably some 1500. I think this is 1000. Yeah, this is like 1000 grit here, and I'll do it wet, and I will just sand that out. And what I'm looking for is anywhere, let me see if I can get it on the camera. I'm looking for anywhere that the line isn't perfect. Like right there, that line isn't quite perfect. And I'll finish that with the paper, just by working on that one little area. Just until I make it perfect. And that does a couple things. It allows me to make that line perfect, and it also softens that edge of paint so that when I clear coat, there's no step between where there's no paint and where there is paint. And then, you know, the wet sanding is super easy. I use a sponge, something stiff, Make sure it doesn't have any debris in it from laying it down on a dirty workspace, because that will transfer through the paper into your paint. You don't want that. I got a little imperfection right there. I think that's going to sand out, but let's get a look at it, and then I'll show you what this edge looks like after I wet sand. So just a little bit of moisture on there. Remember, this is where my repair is in my neck, so I definitely don't want to sand too much in this area, because I will sand through that and you'll see it. Definitely want to make sure that you sand these corners. It's easy to go and stay away from those corners because you know you're going to sand through, but that doesn't mean that they don't have to get sanded at all. They still have to get sanded. You just don't want to over sand there, because as your sandpaper runs off the edge there, look at that, you can already see that it's getting more of the pressure from the sandpaper on that corner. You see the binding right there? So don't overdo it, but also don't skip it, because it'll show. You can see what a thin coat of primer this is. I've already sanded through the primer right there. So that's because it's such a thin coat of primer on there. The thinner it is, the better. And then you just want to get that moisture off of there right away. That's my sealer primer underneath that you can see. You want to get that moisture off of there right away so it can't soak into any of the bare wood. And dry it off. That, I think I'm going to wind up putting a little tiny bit of filler in there. But look at how the binding comes out. It's perfect. And that's what you want to see around everywhere. You want to see that exact look everywhere. Even at the stage where I'm at now, which is only the primer, I haven't done any color coats. I'll do the first color coat, I'll do it again. I'll use a 1500 grit paper to get this line again and to wet sand the first color coat. And then of course I'll have to do that little patch right there. I'm gonna have to put a little bit of filler right there. I don't know where that probably came from me working on it, because it wasn't there and now it is there. I always like to keep my cavities plugged with something so that, see how they stick up? When I turn the guitar over and I lay the guitar down, it's not, the face of the guitar is not touching any of my workspace at all. So that protects it. Also, it keeps me from sanding dust into the cavities, and then when I hit it with the spray paint, that dust gets blasted out of there, and it winds up all over your primer or your color coat. It's not something you want. But got a little bit more work to do on the front of this to make this binding edge look perfect. See how it's super thin over here? It's getting close to where I want it over on this side over here. But we'll go around with some sandpaper. We'll make that consistent. We'll do our little tiny fills right here. Remember, I had to dig all this out with the router, so that must be from my chisel, because the router only comes to like here before it bumps up against the fretboard. So all this got cut out by hand with the chisel, and those are probably chisel marks. But anyway, there's nothing major right there. You can see here's one of the repairs right here. I can still see through it a little bit. Big repair over here, and I think the biggest repair was, I think there was a big one here, and there was another big one up here, I think over here. Let's see. really can't see them at all. The only thing I can still see are the ones where I moved. Oh, there you go. Look at that. Where I moved the holes for the bridge and the stop. Yeah, oh, look at that. Oh, you can really see it. But not worried at all about those. Those will cover up very nicely with the color coat. A couple little spots to fill. Little tiny bit of sand through on the sealer primer right there. And my patch is in here. Oh, I can see it. Oh, I can see it. Okay, so I can't see it here, but I can definitely see it right here. Here's where it ends. Comes across here. And I think I could see it a little bit right here. Yeah, this piece comes out. I think oh, here it is right here. Right at the tip of my blade. I get it in the light. I can see it a little tiny bit where that patch, where that insert, that piece of oak is routed into the neck and into the headstock. So it's wood and wood, and then there's a veneer covering the whole thing, but I think you can still see through that veneer just a little tiny bit, which is okay. It'll cover up very nicely. You can see the patch in here. See the rough all the way up to here. Right there, from there to there. Yeah, you see how it's a different wood. Oh, that's okay. That'll get covered. Nobody will ever see that. Nobody will ever know that this was all redone in here. Except me. I think that's all I got. I think the next one I'll come back after the color coats are probably done and sealed. We'll see how those little repairs came out. We'll make sure that this binding line comes out perfect. And then we'll start putting it back together. Remember, this is the redo of the colors that I hated. So we've got the orange. We're gonna add some blue onto the front of this. We're going to leave the back of it all metallic charcoal, just like you see there. And then, of course, we'll add some of the blue. We'll do something here so we get the blue and the orange on the charcoal background. So that's all I got for this one, guys. I hope you liked it. I'm liking it a lot better than it was. And that's all I got. Peace.